Hey family, it's Danielle, and today we are going to discuss the difference between homeschooling and schooling at home. So I talked about this previously in a past video, and today what we're going to do is just go into more details on my opinions and my thoughts and feelings on what the difference are between homeschooling and, again, schooling at home. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around and then maybe hit that subscribe button at the end of the video. But before we dive right in, if you are new here, hi, my name is Danielle and I am the non-traditional mommy. And on this channel, we talk about things like homeschooling and parenting and life and whatever we find interesting. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would love for you to become a part of my family and hit the subscribe button. To the rest of my non-traditional family, say it with me. You are the MVPs and I love you bunches. Now, let's talk about these differences. So this topic came about with the whole COVID-19 and a lot in school being canceled and parents having to bring their kids home and having to school at home, and the homeschooling community went insane and the parents who were schooling at home kind of went insane and the worlds collided. And so I said in my video where I talked about this that there's a difference between homeschooling and schooling at home. My words of encouragement was, hey, for those of you who are schooling at home, just relax. This thing's gonna pass. Life will eventually return to normal. However, what I have found since then is that more and more parents who were schooling at home have decided or are strongly considering to continue to keep their child at home. So now the question becomes, will they become homeschooling parents or will they continue to school at home? So enough rambling. Let's talk about the differences. Let me just put out a few disclosures. Number one, these are strictly my opinions, my feelings, my thoughts. Homeschooling is a broad spectrum, and it is done differently in everybody's household. It is looked at differently in all types of different perspectives. So this is strictly my thoughts, my feelings, and my opinions. Number two, just for those of you who are curious and don't know my background, I have been homeschooling now for, let's see, my oldest currently in school. She's going to be a senior this year. And then my oldest son was homeschooled for a few years as well. So I've been homeschooling for about 15 years. Holy crap. Has it really been 15 years? Oh my gosh. Let's not ever say that out loud again. Let's just not. But yes, so I've been homeschooling for about 15 years. So that's just a little background on myself. And the last disclosure is, you guys, my kids are so loud. So loud. So I apologize in advance if you guys hear them screaming and yelling. I mean, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? So the first thing I want to talk about, and I think the most major difference between homeschooling and schooling at home, is the types of homeschooling, the categories that would fall under homeschooling. For example, you have unschooling, you have life schooling, you have interest-led schooling, you have schooling at home. You just have so many different types of homeschoolers and different ways to homeschool that it cannot be put into a little box. Homeschooling, again, is just a broad spectrum, and it looks different for each family. So you might go into this household and homeschooling looks this way, and then you go into this household and it looks totally different, and it's like, okay, but it's all homeschooling. It just looks different. It cannot be defined one way. Whereas schooling at home is very traditional. It looks like traditional schooling. You're typically going to have traditional curriculums. You're typically going to have traditional expectations. So it looks very traditional. With schooling at home, it's going to look like a classroom. So you're typically going to have a desk, a curriculum, an adult standing in front of the child, giving instructions, giving deadlines, giving grades, different things like that. It's going to look very similar to what you would see in a classroom, only it's being done at home. Make sense? You guys got that one? So homeschooling can look all kinds of different ways. It cannot always be pinpointed, whereas schooling at home looks very traditional to a regular classroom and typical schooling. Number two, piggybacking right off of that, homeschooling takes place everywhere. Typically, it is not going to take place at home. Homeschoolers will find anywhere to homeschool but home. It can be the park, it can be at a playground, it can be museums, it can be on vacation, just anywhere, all over the place. Even when they're in the house, schooling takes place in the bedroom, in the kitchen, wherever. Schooling just happens in multiple and different types of locations. Whereas schooling at home, you typically have this classroom set up. A room in your house has been designated as the schoolroom, maybe an extra guest bedroom, or a portion of the playroom, or a portion of the kitchen. You're gonna have desk possibly, or charts and chalkboard charts on the wall, maybe even a chalkboard, different things like that. You have a room that is set up that resembles a classroom. And let me just say, when I first started homeschooling, I was schooling at home. I had a classroom set up. We painted a full wall in our room with chalkboard paint. I had the charts up. My kids had the cute little traditional desks that lifted up and had all their books in them. So it resembled a classroom. Very much so. When you walked into that room of my house, you knew that is where we did school. One of the differences is homeschooling takes place everywhere. Whereas now, the difference now is we homeschool pretty much on the go. It is literally always on the go. When we take a vacation, we are fitting some type of learning into that vacation. I no longer say, oh, we're on summer break or fall break or spring break, because we school and we learn all the time. So that is one of the differences. Homeschoolers will go to a museum and now we're at school. Like the museum is our school for the day. Number three, homeschooling is usually eclectic. You're going to have multiple types of curriculums, trying to find what fits your child's needs, what interests them, how they learn. Multiple curriculums kind of put into one. It's an eclectic learning. So you may have textbooks for English, but then you may do math online, or you may have textbooks for math, but then English consists of a lot of writing and reading and real books and different things like that. You may go to co-op for one thing and then put together all these other resources for another thing. It's just very eclectic, very child-based, which we will get into in just a second. It's very child-led. So you're finding curriculum and ways and ideas to meet your child. The adult isn't coming in and saying, okay, here's the curriculum we're going to use for math, whether you like it or not, whether it works for you or not. it's going to fit, and this is what we're using. And if you have multiple kids, this is what all my kids are using. Homeschooling, typically the child is leading. You learn this way, so I'm going to find a curriculum that helps you learn in the way that's best suited for you. And so it is very child-led, whereas schooling at home is typically going to be a set curriculum. We're usually, not always, but usually going to use books. Homeschooling, you can opt to not use books at all. We spent a year where we did not use books, and we learned hands-on in all kind of different ways. So you can do that under the umbrella of homeschooling. Schooling at home, typically there's going to be a curriculum. Usually that curriculum may cover all of the subjects. For example, Abeka is one that I loved and used faithfully from my early years of homeschooling, i.e. schooling at home. But you're going to have a traditional curriculum. The curriculum is usually going to break it down, going to tell you what to do today, what to do tomorrow, when they need to turn this in, how to grade it. It's just going to be very traditional and look very similar to curriculums that you would find in a private school or even a public school. I keep using examples of when I first started homeschooling and how I did a lot of schooling at home. But what I'm talking about here is our current situation and COVID-19, and how a lot of parents were pushed into having to bring their kids home and having to do school at home. It's just different. It's very different. So using that as our basis, a lot of these parents were given packets, or they were doing Zoom calls with the teachers, or logging into some type of internet-based school where they were kind of told what to do, how to do it, when to turn it in, how to turn it in, so forth and so on. They were essentially doing school at home. Whereas for homeschoolers, they're not doing that. They may have multiple different things going on for sometimes even one subject. So it's just very different. So the fourth thing, and I think one of the biggest differences between homeschooling and schooling at home, is that homeschooling is usually child-paced and child-focused. Meaning you are going at the child's pace. There is no rush. There is no huge push to get there by a certain deadline. It is focused on the child, and it goes at that child's pace. A great example would be multiplication. If your child is struggling with multiplication, you're going to stay there until they get it. Once they get it, then we'll move on to division. And if that means we're not doing division until 5th grade, then we're not doing division until 5th grade. You're not going to say this has to be met by the end of this semester or by the end of these 6 weeks. You have to have this. It is more child-paced. So you're going to stay there until the child gets it. And honestly, me learning that and fully understanding that is what freed me, I think, when it came to homeschooling and my rigidness, is understanding that I could be child-paced. There was no rush anymore. Like, I could literally focus in on my child and say, okay, this child needs more time here. So we're going to spend more time here. We're not going to move on until they fully get it. Whereas this child got this particular thing in 2 days. Now they're bored. So let's skip and move ahead a lot faster. So again, it's very much so child-paced and child-focused. Whereas schooling at home is going to be based on Common Core and a traditional pace. You're going to be looking at, what do they need to know in these 6 weeks? What do they need to know by the time they finish kindergarten? What do they need to know by the time they do this? What do they need to know in order to get to this grade? It's going to be a traditional pace, and it's going to be pushed to meet that pace. So your child needs to know how to do root counting by the end of this 6 weeks. And if they don't know how to do it, we're still moving on. And then we need to figure out how to get them caught up or whatever else. They're not just schooling at home is not going to say, well, they don't have it, so let's just stick here for a little while. Again, using our current situation with COVID-19, as a parent, you may have picked up on, oh my gosh, she is struggling with this particular concept. We need to spend more time here. However, the teacher has moved on and went on to the next thing. Or your packet may say, okay, when this is over, now you need to move on to this. It's traditionally paced, and it's gonna go based off of Common Core. This is how we do it. Doesn't matter if it doesn't work for this child or that child. This is how it's done. This is how we're going to do it. And so again, even if you used a homeschool curriculum, again, I'm going to use Abeka as an example. It tells you exactly how it should be done and how quickly you need to move through it. Now, while you can take a curriculum such as Abeka and make it fit into a homeschooling approach, meaning we're going to slow it all the way down and we're not going to go at the pace that it is recommended. If you use it as it is designed to use, then you're going to be doing schooling at home, because again, it's telling you exactly what to do, how quickly it should be done, what needs to be learned, and so forth and so on. Number 5, and this one is kind of generally based because it really depends on your umbrella school. But with homeschooling, typically grades and testing is optional, and that depends strictly on the umbrella school that you are under. Some umbrella schools require 0 grades, 0 testing. Some make it optional and some it is required. So it just depends on the umbrella school that you go under. But that's what makes homeschooling different, is because you can choose the umbrella school that you are under. For us, our umbrella school requires that we submit grades, but does not require testing. Testing is optional for us. So again, those things become optional based off of what you as the parent decide you want to do. Whereas schooling at home, typically grades and testing is not going to be optional. You need to turn in the grades and you need to do the testing. And again, using this specific situation, when your kids came home, you needed to turn in their work and the teachers needed to submit their grades. It was no longer optional on if you had to do it. Now, some schools it was, and some schools it wasn't. But schooling at home, if you continue on this premises that we may have to keep our kids at home longer, understand the schools are going to have a system in place where grades will be reported and standardized testing will be done somehow, some way, but it will be a requirement. And that is a huge difference, is that with homeschooling, you can navigate to where those things are not required, whereas schooling at home, those things are absolutely, probably, more than likely, mostly going to be required. Number 6. Homeschooling is generally more relaxed. Now that I have transitioned into more of a homeschooling mom versus schooling at home, it's more relaxed. There isn't this rigidness to it. There isn't this structuredness to it. Now, again, you guys, it depends on the homeschooling family. There are some families that homeschool absolutely, and it is rigid and it is structured and there is a routine and it looks this way. However, it doesn't have to. That's what makes homeschooling different. It doesn't have to look like that. That is optional. So homeschooling can be more relaxed. Doesn't have to be, okay, school starts at 8 o'clock, everybody up at 8, at your desk, pencils out, ready to go. Up 9 o'clock, English books up, math books out, let's go. It doesn't have to look like that. School can take place all throughout the day as long as you're getting your required hours in. It can take place in the morning. It can take place at night. It's just a little more, or I would say a lot more, relaxed. When you're going at the child's pace, that also helps it to be relaxed because you're taking your time. You're not feeling like you need to meet a deadline in order, for your child to go to the next level, which again makes it more relaxed. Whereas schooling at home is going to be a little more rigid, especially if you are doing virtual schooling, which is a big thing already and has the possibility of becoming even more popular in the future. So virtual schooling, we used to have here in Tennessee, K-12. So the kids were home doing school, but they were schooling at home because they had to log on to the computer at a certain time. They had to be there for a certain time. They had to turn in their work on a certain day, and it was rigid and structured. So while they were technically home schooling, they were really schooling at home, doing what they would very much so be doing in a classroom, only they were doing it at home. So schooling at home tends to be, again, a lot more rigid, a lot more structured, not a lot of wiggle room. You need to get this done, you have this schedule, and we need to follow and abide by these rules. The final thing, and I think one of the biggest things that became clear during this time for the difference between homeschooling and schooling at home is homeschooling, most of the parents are self-taught. Meaning we had to figure this thing out for ourselves. We had to figure out, how the heck do I homeschool? What type of curriculum do I use? What is an umbrella school? How do I choose one? How do I find one? What kind of schedule do I set up? How do I set up my schedule? Where do I set up my classroom in the house? Do I need a classroom? It is all self-taught. We're trying to figure this thing out. We're learning as we go. We're growing. We don't have somebody giving us step-by-step directions on what to do. Whereas schooling at home, in this situation, you had a teacher that sent everything home, or you logged into some type of classroom and they had everything laid out for you. There wasn't a whole lot of thought that had to go into it. You were told this is what you do, and then you just did it. So the same kind of applies with resources. When this whole COVID-19 thing happened, you had a lot of places that was like, oh, try this or try that, or sign up for this program for free. All parents, your kids are at home, sign up for free. Whereas for us homeschoolers, this stuff is not free, man. We're having to pay for it. We're having to buy it. It's all trial and error. We may get a 7-day free trial if we're lucky, but most of the stuff we're buying. And if it fails, if it doesn't work for our child, that's just money lost, and we're on to the next thing, paying and trying that. So again, very much so self-taught, whereas schooling at home, you have people that are almost at your beck and call, trying to help you and guide you along the way. So another big difference. So I hope that all kind of makes sense and fits together. Look at it from the standpoint of working from home versus an entrepreneur. When you work from home, you're essentially doing everything that you would be doing in the office, only you're doing it at home. Your boss or manager or whoever, supervisor, has given you clear instructions on what needs to be done. You know what projects need to get finished. You have a deadline, and you know what time you need to be logged into your computer to get this stuff done. You may even be required to log in at a certain time. So while you are home, you are technically working from home. You're still doing all the things that you would do if you were in the office. You're just doing it at home. So I would equivalent that to schooling at home. Whereas an entrepreneur, They may not have a set time to be in at work. They're figuring out what needs to be done today. They're figuring out how to motivate somebody, how to motivate themselves. They're trying to find different resources and projects, and there isn't a set certain time, but they know they need to get certain things done in order to advance their business. I would equivalent that to homeschooling. So while the entrepreneur may look different for each person and how they run their business, they have a very set or very distinctive things that they have in common. So while we both are home and we're both working from home, you work from home, they work from home, we're both doing work at home, our road and our experiences are going to be different. While yes, there are some things that will be the same that we can discuss, there will be some very similar challenges, like the dog keeps barking every time I try to get on a conference call, or whatever the case may be. There are going to be challenges and things that are distinctively different because what we're doing is not the same. We're in two different lanes. Does that make sense, you guys? I hope that that's in my brain, that's a good analogy. I hope that that makes sense and that that's a good analogy for you guys. I did experience being schooled at home as a teenager in high school. My second semester of my freshman year, I had a baby, and so I was put on homebound, as they called it at that time. And so I was home, and then I had, I think 2 or 3 of my teachers came to my house, and then I had a tutor for the other subjects. And they would come once a week, teach me the lesson, leave my homework assignments, then that next week come pick them up, teach me another lesson, so forth and so on. At the end of the school year, I still had to do the standardized testing, still had to turn in my grades, and so forth and so on. So while I was, I guess, homeschooling, I really was just doing school at home. Everything I would have done on campus, I was doing at home. And so I do have that personal experience with what it feels like to do school at home. However, I have not had to school my children at home, if that makes sense. Other than when I was a very early homeschooler, I did school at home because I do feel like most new homeschoolers, schooling at home is going to be the easiest way to get started. You know, you are learning, you don't know anything, you don't have a reference except for traditional school. And so you do what is most comfortable, which is to school at home. As we talked about in all of these examples, everything is laid out for us, so it is easier to do. I think as you become more comfortable as a homeschooler and grow and gain wisdom and knowledge and things like that, it is much easier to become relaxed and to actually begin homeschooling rather than schooling at home. So again, I hope all of that makes sense and that answered the question on the difference between homeschooling and schooling at home. But I would love to hear what you guys' thoughts are, if I left anything out, any differences that come to your mind, or if you feel like there isn't really any difference, I would love to hear that as well. If you have any other questions along this topic, feel free to leave them below. And if you have not subscribed and joined the family, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and join my little family. We would love to have you as part of the non-traditional family. To the rest of my family, you guys already know I love you, and I will see you in the next one.